"When did you stop needing me?" David asked. Laura slowly looked up, and then she asked quietly, "When did you decide that was what this is about?" The argument had been building for months. Laura had retired 3 months earlier, after more than 30 years of work. David was still working full-time. When Laura first retired, he imagined they would finally have more time together. Slow mornings, long breakfasts, evenings on the couch. The kind of retirement they had talked about for years. Instead, Laura seemed busier than ever. She signed up for painting classes, joined a walking group, started meeting friends regularly, took a photography course, volunteered at a community center. Every week seemed packed with new plans. At first, David found it amusing. "Retirement looks exhausting," he joked. Laura laughed. But after a while, the joke stopped being funny. More and more often, David came home to an empty house. Some evenings, Laura had classes. Other evenings, she met friends. Sometimes she spent entire weekends participating in events or activities. She wasn't hiding anything. In fact, she happily told him about everything she did. Yet somehow, David felt more distant from her than ever. One Friday evening, he came home carrying takeout from their favorite restaurant. He imagined a quiet dinner together. Instead, he found a note on the kitchen counter. "Dinner with friends. Back later. Love you." David stood there, staring at the note. The food slowly grew cold. That night, he ate alone. For the first time, he felt like a guest in his own marriage. The feeling stayed with him. Every empty chair bothered him. Every canceled evening felt personal. Every new activity sounded like proof that Laura no longer needed him. The strange part was that he knew she wasn't doing anything wrong. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling. One afternoon, his coworker, Mark, noticed he seemed distracted. "Everything okay?" David shrugged. "I think my wife has moved on." Mark frowned. "Moved on?" "She retired." Mark laughed. "That doesn't sound like moving on." David forced a smile, because he couldn't explain it properly. What bothered him wasn't Laura's new hobbies. It was what they seemed to mean. For decades, their lives had revolved around work, routines, and responsibilities. Now Laura appeared completely comfortable, building a life that didn't include him every moment of the day. And David wasn't sure where he fit anymore. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening. Laura walked into the house, smiling. She immediately started talking about a weekend retreat organized by her art group. Before she could finish, David interrupted her. "Do you ever think about anyone besides yourself anymore?" The room went silent. Laura stared at him. "What?" Months of frustration finally spilled out. "You retire and suddenly everything is about you. Laura blinked. You can't be serious. Yes, I am. His voice grew louder. You always have plans. Classes, trips, friends, activities. Another pause. You're never here. Laura looked at him carefully, not angry, disappointed. That's what this is about? David laughed bitterly. What else would it be about? For a few seconds, neither spoke. Then David finally admitted the truth. I feel like you've left me behind. The words hung in the air. Laura's expression softened. For the first time, she seemed to understand what was really happening. Laura sat across from him. For a moment, she simply looked at him. Then she spoke. I spent 30 years waiting for you to notice that I didn't have a life of my own. David frowned. Laura continued. For years, everything revolved around work. Your work, our responsibilities, our routines. She paused. I don't blame you for that. I chose that life, too. David listened silently. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being a person outside of those things. The room was completely quiet. Laura looked directly at him. Now you've finally noticed that I have a life of my own. She paused again. Please don't ask me to give it up. David looked down at the table. For the first time that evening, he had no response. And for the first time in months, both of them were finally talking about the real problem. That night, neither of them slept particularly well. David kept replaying Laura's words. I spent 30 years waiting for you to notice that I didn't have a life of my own. The sentence stayed with him because deep down, he knew there was truth in it. The next morning, Laura left for her painting class. David watched her through the window. She looked happy. Not because she was escaping him, because she finally seemed comfortable being herself. For the first time, he wondered if he had been looking at the situation from the wrong angle. A few days later, while cleaning a closet, David found an old photo album. He sat down and started flipping through it. Vacation pictures, family celebrations, weekend trips, years of memories. Then something caught his attention. In almost every photograph, Laura was standing beside him, supporting him, celebrating his achievements, adjusting her schedule around his work, helping him through difficult periods. Yet very few pictures showed her doing something that belonged only to her. The realization was uncomfortable. For years, he had assumed they were building a life together. But maybe Laura had spent much of that time fitting herself into the life they built around him. The following week, Laura invited him to a small exhibition organized by her art class. David almost refused. Part of him still felt hurt. But eventually, he agreed. When he arrived, he saw something he wasn't expecting. Laura looked completely different. Not physically. She simply seemed more confident, more alive. She spoke with people easily, showed them her paintings, shared stories, laughed. A woman from the class approached David. "You must be Laura's husband." David smiled politely. The woman nodded. "She talks about you all the time." That surprised him. The woman continued. "Honestly, we're all a little jealous. She always says how supportive you've been through the years." David didn't know what to say, because lately he had convinced himself that Laura was building a life without him. Yet clearly, she still carried him into every room she entered. Driving home that evening, neither spoke much, but the silence felt different. Not tense, thoughtful. Later, sitting together in the living room, David finally broke the silence. "I think I was jealous." Laura looked at him. "Jealous of what?" He laughed softly. "Of your freedom." Laura didn't answer immediately. David continued. "You retired and found a new version of yourself." He looked down. "And I think I was angry because I haven't found mine." Laura's expression softened. For the first time, she understood what had been hiding beneath his frustration. It wasn't anger. It was fear. Fear of becoming irrelevant. Fear of standing still while she kept moving forward. Laura moved closer. "I wasn't running away from you." David looked at her. Laura smiled sadly. "I was finally running toward myself." The words landed gently this time. Not like an accusation, like an explanation. And David finally understood. For years, Laura had organized her life around his work, schedules, and responsibilities. Now, for the first time in decades, she finally had time for herself. And she wasn't wasting it. A few evenings later, David admitted something he had never said aloud. "I don't know who I am without work." Laura looked surprised. He shrugged. "It sounds ridiculous." "No," she said quietly. "It doesn't." David leaned back. "You found your new rhythm." Then he smiled weakly. "I'm still looking for mine." That conversation changed something between them. The problem was no longer Laura's retirement. The problem was that David was still trying to live in a chapter that had already ended. A week later, Laura handed him a brochure. David looked at it. A woodworking course. He laughed. "Are you trying to sign me up?" Laura smiled. "No." She pointed at the brochure. "I'm reminding you that your life isn't over just because your career eventually will be." At first, he laughed. Then he actually read it. A month later, he enrolled. Not because Laura pushed him, because for the first time, he became curious about what his own future could look like. Soon, he found himself enjoying it. Meeting people, learning new skills, building things with his hands. Little by little, he stopped measuring his life against Laura's and started building one of his own. Several months later, something unexpected happened. They met for coffee one Saturday afternoon after spending the morning apart. And for the first time in years, they both had stories to tell, new experiences, new ideas, new interests. The conversation lasted for hours, not because they were trying to save their marriage, because they genuinely enjoyed discovering who the other person was becoming. One evening, much later, Laura was getting ready for another photography walk. David watched her from the doorway. This time, he didn't feel abandoned. He smiled. Laura noticed. "What?" David shook his head. Then he walked over and kissed her forehead. "I'm glad you didn't let me stop you." Laura smiled. "So am I." As she headed toward the door, David added, "And when you get back, you'll have to tell me all about it." She laughed. "I will." After she left, David sat quietly for a moment. Then he looked at the woodworking project sitting on his table and smiled. For years, they believed a successful marriage meant living the same life. Now they understood something different. Sometimes, love after 50 means giving the person beside you permission to grow. And the strongest marriages aren't the ones where people stay exactly the same. They're the ones where both people are allowed to change and still choose each other every day. Who do you agree with more, David or Laura? Let me know in the comments.